Okay, so we are recording this session so that in case we have to present again, or we will share it with you because there are so many good things. I hope to listen to so many good things. I've been talking to Michael for a long time, and I'm always impressed by his wisdom and his what he does. I'll give a very quick walkthrough of what he does. So Michael spent 14, nearly 14 years at FBI, starting as an agent, and then he became a special agent, and then became a supervisor at FBI in the cybersecurity cell. Michael has presented about 500 presentations. Michael, is that right?
It's probably over. It's like almost near 1,000 now. I just say over 500 because I don't keep track.
Right. Okay. So last time when we spoke, I think that was last year. It was about 500 presentations. But Michael is also a distinguished fellow of the FBI Academy, which is very few people who get that kind of honor. Is that correct, Michael?
That's correct. I don't think anyone on the call has been to the FBI Academy, have you? Hopefully not.
No, it doesn't look like that we have anyone from the academy. Right. So, Michael, is there anything else that you would like to add? Otherwise, then we will start and we'll start asking questions.
No, again, I appreciate everyone staying up late in Australia and wherever else you're calling in from, or if you're in the US, thanks for getting up early. Hopefully you're not further on the coast than I am. I'm on the East Coast. So here right now it's 6 a.m., 6:30. So if you're on the West Coast, it's really early. But I appreciate you guys taking the time to chat with me. And I definitely hope that you guys can ask questions that you have on your mind with anything as it pertains to cybersecurity. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. Yeah. So I have a lot of questions that I have received from different people, and at this moment I have 15 questions. If anyone has any other questions, just add to the chat, and I will keep an eye on the chat as well. Right. Okay. So, Michael, the first question that I received was what type of threat common people are dealing with?
So I think the most pervasive threats out there's three. And I think most people will eventually deal with it at some point, right? One of them is data breaches. So data breach is one of the most common things that people will hear about. And that's where someone goes into your either home network, most likely a corporate network, and they're going to take something of value without permission. That's essentially one of the biggest threats that people deal with. The other is ransomware. So ransomware is where someone goes in with some malicious code, and most of ransomware attacks are automated. They're not targeted, but they'll go in an autonomous fashion and find value of items of value on your laptop or your corporate network, and they'll encrypt them automatically. And then you'll get a ransom. It'll be a notification on screen that says, hey, if you want to actually access this, you have to pay X amount of money, and here's how you make the payment. So ransomware is hugely popular among cyber criminals because it's so easy to do. There's something termed malware as a service. So essentially what that is, it's kind of like SaaS, software as a service, but specific for malware. It makes malware usage very easy, and it allows the criminal element to completely change. Before, a lot of individuals who are facilitating cyber schemes were somewhat sophisticated, but now you don't have to be. Now it's easy to use, and criminals that create these types of malicious pieces of software recognize that one of the barriers to entry was the technical expertise. Well, now they removed it by making it easy. So malware as a service is very popular, and one of the key components there is ransomware. The most common and most prolific cybercrime that is out there is not sexy at all, but it's business email compromise. It's a variant of phishing. So what business email compromise is, it's when you have a trusted relationship. So like, we'll say Rajesh and I have a trusted relationship, and we're exchanging information with one another. At some point, we'll say he's going to pay me for some service. Well, if we develop that ongoing relationship and I pay him, or he pays me every month, if someone were to come and intercept that communication, and then Rajesh is to think it's me, and then they were to tell him, oh, hey, can you shift bank accounts? Instead of paying the old account you were transferring money to, transfer to this one instead. And I'm not aware of that transaction because someone potentially compromised my email server. And then that's where the intercept occurred. Sometimes there's not even a compromise. Sometimes they just create an email account that looks similar to mine, and they send it to the person. Well, then in this instance, Rajesh will then transfer the money because he thinks it's me communicating with him. And then he'll transfer money elsewhere. I'll never receive it, and the threat actor is one who actually gets the money. That is the most common form of cybercrime, period. Like no matter where you are, because it's easiest. You don't even have to be technical at all to facilitate that one. It's just spoofing something. So you have to know enough to create a domain name and or pay a service to mask your domain and then facilitate the scheme that way. So those are the big three. Those are the big ones that people are going to deal with.
Right. But believe me, I'm not going to transfer any money, even if you ask.
How dare you?
All right. Good. Yeah, that was good to know, and scary as well at the same time. Now,
Yeah,
the second,
my objective is not to scare anyone. The purpose I can actually educate you. So if you're scared at the end of this call, I did not do a good job.
right. So we got another question there, which is threats are everywhere and always evolving. Is there a way we can address this, and is it even possible to catch up on ever-changing landscape of threats?
It's not possible to always be ahead of the threat actor. It's not probable. It is possible, but it might be cost prohibitive. And the reason why I say that is because one of the things you would have to do if you were to tell me, hey, Michael, I have unlimited funds and I want to stay ahead of the threat actor, you could actually do that. You would have to have a fairly sophisticated cyber security regime, and most companies aren't going to pay for that. What that would look like is basically employing contractors. You would actually, believe it or not, employ hackers who are black hat. These are individuals who are facilitating schemes to share information that they're acquiring and understanding on the dark web with your cybersecurity team about latest trends and threats as they see them. Some private sector companies do this to some degree, but you really need to make sure that those individuals are actually facilitating illicit activity. Very hard to do, and none of this is legal, but basically you would have to get that intelligence from them and then use that intelligence to basically harden your security. Most companies aren't going to do that, and most companies aren't going to go to that level. I think it's important to kind of highlight some of the things that I see and then I've dealt with either firsthand or I've witnessed. A lot of the issues aren't high tech. They're actually low tech. Like the ones I described before, the BizEmo compromise, the most prolific cyber scheme out there, it's a low tech issue. You're not always going to deal with a nation state actor who is going to be facilitating an attack on your organization's network. The majority of organizations aren't going to deal with that. Instead, they're going to deal with cyber hygiene issues. And so with that, I mean, you're going to have to basically ensure that your employees are educated. You're going to basically want to develop process for software installation. It means you have a good network administrator that's managing this. You want to patch all applications that are susceptible. So anything touching the internet is a susceptible application. You want to make sure all that's patched with the latest software or security updates. You're going to want to basically consistently back up all of your sensitive information on an ongoing cadence. You're going to want to basically create complex passwords. You want to actually limit the number of users on your network with administrative privileges. So those are some finite things that you can do currently for cyber hygiene that can help protect you from some of the more low-tech threats. If you have a APT targeting you, so advanced persistent threat, that's a generic term typically used in the US to describe some sort of unknown foreign threat, or what they perceive to be somewhat known, because they'll label these like APT21, APT7, etc. That's a nomenclature that a lot of cybersecurity companies use to describe an advanced persistent threat. If you have one of those are generally nation-state actors. They're going to probably find a way around most security measures, but doesn't mean you shouldn't try to deal with it. However, you have to ask yourself, am I in a position where I have to worry about that? You may not be. If you're not, and you're like the majority, most of us, then you just have to focus on good cyber hygiene. That really will help you out tremendously.
So who are nation-state actors, and why does it sound so scary that they're more dangerous than anybody else?
So nation-state actors it depends honestly on the country you're calling from, right? It depends on what government relations your country has developed with other countries. The vast majority of countries will spy on one another, believe it or not. Even allied countries will do that. It's a very common practice. it's weird when I was privy to this. I'm like, why on earth would these allies spy? Well, it's just because it's one of the things they don't quite trust one another. So if you're in any country, you have to be cognizant of that. If you're creating a service or technology that's innovative, like if you're on this call and you're like, oh, I actually create something that's quite revolutionary, you're going to be a target because all those other countries are going to want to steal the intellectual property to utilize it to their advantage. Some countries are a little bit more prolific or aggressive in this practice than others. So one of them is China. The reason why China is so prolific and the reason why it's so common for them is because the vast majority of their companies are state-owned entities or heavily subsidized by the government of China, which is very different than the US. So in the US, the vast majority, like almost all of the companies that operate in the US, the government can't do anything about. There's regulatory elements, but they don't control companies like the Chinese do. The Chinese government, they're funding companies, they're controlling the companies that are within their country operating. So because of that level of oversight and governance, they can dictate what those companies do. And they operate at the behest of those companies. So if there's some innovative technology that you're creating and the Chinese government sees, hey, that's valuable to us as a country, they'll take that intellectual property through, this is typically the APTs, the advanced persistent threats. They'll take that intellectual property from you without asking, and then they'll pass it along to various companies in their country that can then take that technology, expand upon it, monetize it, and give the Chinese a head up or a leg up in the race when it comes to tech. So this is an ongoing practice. The director of the FBI recently released a report, I believe yesterday, that talked about the Chinese activity in this arena. The FBI and other government agencies that really focus on threat intelligence, they normally don't disclose the level of information that was disclosed yesterday. So if you haven't read it, I'd encourage you to Google and just find Director FBI and type in the news, and then you'll basically be able to see the latest presentations or press releases. It's from the FBI specifically. It's a very lengthy document, but I would encourage you to take some time to read it to truly understand the threat that the Chinese pose to pretty much anyone in the world that basically has something of value that they think is going to add to their arms race when it comes to technology. So anyway, so Chinese is one of them. The others are Russians. Iranians and the North Koreans are very prolific in this space. Again, a lot of these countries are looking at dictatorships or communist countries where their civil liberties aren't at the forefront, versus like Australia or the US or Canada or others where there's a clear division between the government and the companies.
Right.
Does that help? I said a lot though.
Yes, yeah, and Yashwant has just asked a question, and she's saying, why isn't no action being taken against China for using the IPRs?
IPRs? Oh, like intellectual property theft?
I think so, yeah.
There is some, it's complicated because of, at least it depends on the country. If your country is one whereby you develop an ongoing relationship with the Chinese and there's benefit for your country, like in the US's instance, companies in the US are basically developing products in China at reduced labor costs, and the Chinese are allowing this to occur. It's been going on for decades. There's a lot of political pressure there. And the Chinese are a global power. They have a lot of influence. So countries have to be careful of how they engage in foreign relations. In addition, it's complicated because it's not as seamless, like in the US, at least, in any government, it's complex, it's convoluted, everything's compartmentalized. So what happens in the FBI many times is contained in the FBI. So for me back when I was with the FBI, to get information to a US senator or someone who's empowered to maybe craft a law to protect anything, or like protect a person or an organization or entity, that actually requires a lot of lift, believe it or not, pass that information along. They take that element and then magnify it out because there's so many different government entities. For us to seamlessly share information with another is almost impossible. Every country that is working in a democracy is going to have that problem. The other issue that complicates is just the political pressures put upon people who are governing the country. You have a lot of constituents. I'm just talking about one specific narrow issue regarding cybersecurity. It's not dealing with development of financial aid. It's not dealing with humanitarian issues. Like there's so many other competing components that have to be factored in. Cybersecurity is just one of them.
Right. All right. So Paul Senos and I, when we spoke last time, one of the topics that we discussed was remote working. And we have a similar question this time as well, which is with the prevalence of remote working, what should leaders at companies focus on?
So there's a few things I can kind of talk to you about remote work that you want to sort of focus on and consider, think about. One is misconfigurations or failure patch like Windows updates. Some of the protocols in play too, like RDP, remote desktop protocol. That's a very common protocol. And if you don't know what that is, basically what that allows you to do is to connect from, like if you're a system administrator, to connect to another machine that in your network. So you can basically either help troubleshoot, or it could be a way for you to develop communication protocol between various computers. There's a lot of reasons why you would use RDP. But many times RDP, that particular protocol is open, it's not closed. So you want to make sure that those are closed for your users to spread across remote environment. You don't want any type of ports associated with RDP open, because then that allows anyone to connect to that machine. And then potentially, once you're in the machine, then you can look at ways to exfil or exfiltrate data. So that's what you're trying to guard against. So that really just comes down to misconfigurations. Something else you want to basically be mindful of is inconsistent application of like network traffic. So what that basically means is you have a lot of firewall-based rules, and they're not uniformly enforced across the network.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a series of firewall rules, depends on how data is trafficked into your network when you're working remote. If you're using VPN, which is what everyone should be using. So if you're not using a VPN in order for your end users to touch corporate infrastructure, that's a problem. So that's one of the things you definitely want to be cognizant of. You want to basically set up a VPN. But if you're using VPN and everyone's funneling through it, you want to make sure that that network traffic that you're allowing to go through your VPN is being monitored, and that the various ports that don't need to be accessed aren't, and that they're closed. But having a VPN is one of the key critical components when it comes to working remote. The other thing is just hardware focused. One of the components that when you're working remote, companies just aren't thinking about, and it kind of makes sense, but it's something you should sort of be cognizant of and be aware of, wireless routers. So we talked about the Chinese. A lot of these wireless routers are made in China. Actually, the majority of them are. Well, they're not all secure. So there are some vulnerabilities built in, either at the hardware level, but sometimes it's not the hardware. It's just the fact, like when I was in the FBI, there was a case that I was working whereby we thought that this person in question was facilitating a scheme. When we basically entered we raided their apartment, and we went in there and we started gathering data and information. And after interviewing the person, we realized that the person probably wasn't the person doing it. When we looked closer at their wireless router, we realized it was compromised. So when we looked technically at the router, at the firmware, we saw that someone basically overlaid some software over this and actually was using that as a hot point. So allowing them to come into that one and route traffic out of it. So the person wasn't ever aware of it. They were innocent. They were just like, I'm not doing what you're accusing me of doing. And when we realized that, we realized, oh, well, this person didn't do this. Someone compromised that router. So apply that today. If you have employees across the country or across the globe, and that wireless router is potentially open to compromise, which many of them are, that's a problem. So what you want to do as an organization is you want to think, okay, well, hold on. If we're going to keep a remote environment persistent, maybe we buy secure routers that we trust that we can then deploy to our remote employees, and then they're built for security. So there's routers or smart routers that are built for security purposes. There's some companies out there that create them. One is a company called Griffin. Another big one is Google. So Google Nest router. I believe it's called Google Nest Wi-Fi. That Google's rebranded as Nest Wi-Fi. Those are two examples of where you can buy these routers. These routers are actually quite effective. and they enhance performance, but they're built for security. So they're built like with Google. One of the security features they have built in is if the firmware is if altered in any way, the router stops working. So these are just built-in security protocols that, as a business, you can basically acquire and deploy out to your remote workforce. So, anyway, so those are some things to think about.
Right, that's interesting. So, as an employee, and a lot of us here, we are employees as well. So, should we care that our routers are safe and secure, or um, we
Yes.
we should? Okay.
You don't
All
want the
right.
FBI. You don't want the FBI knocking down your door, right? When it's
It
not you.
won't be in Australia, so no, it won't.
Or you
It
don't want
might.
the Australian government knocking on your door. So, but that's very rare. So compromising a router is not as common as, we'll say, you're dealing with malicious software on a laptop. However, it's just something to be cognizant of. And I wouldn't encourage you to basically do this just for that one anecdote. But one of the benefits of having a smart router is that it enhances performance. So, like example, and when I first shifted, and when I say smart routers, specifically routers again that are built for ease of use. They're not something you get from your internet service provider. They're not. They're a little bit more expensive because they're going to allow you greater flexibility. Some other routers will allow you like some level of security that you as an end user can interact with quite easily on your phone. So the router I use is Griffin, and they allow you to have an easy interface. And so as an end user, you can control usage. So if you have children, you can basically say you want to block certain devices on your network. When someone, like my in-laws come in, and I don't want them giving my son their iPad, literally I do this. I block my mother-in-law's iPad so that she can't access the internet on my home router. So she's like, why is this not working? I'm like, I don't know idea. That's weird. But anyway, it gives you that flexibility of control. So then you have more control over what's happening in your home. So you're a parent, that's useful. But then also performance. Like we'll say you're paying for 100 megabytes of service. A lot of the internet service providers will give you a router, and you'll see a lot of degradation in bandwidth. You'll be paying for 100 megabytes, but you're only going to get 20 or 10. And you're like, what is happening? It's just because these routers aren't really the most effective. These smart routers I'm talking about, you'll get almost a full 100. It's crazy how many benefits you get from having them.
Right.
So anyway, it's not just for security, it's just for performance.
Yeah, sounds very interesting to me. All right, so that's another thing that I'll have to look into. Well, we got more questions, and one of them is it sounds like a very basic question, but very important question as well. What is the root of the cybersecurity problem?
That's a good one. I think the root is two-pronged. I mean, you're going to probably look at, depending on if you want to talk about the theft or the thief or the victim. So looking at the thief element, so this is something I started thinking about more recently. So this idea is percolating in my mind, but I'm starting to formulate it more. But basically, you look at the thief. So cybersecurity, if you strip it down from all the technical elements associated with it, it's essentially just an act of theft. It's someone stealing something. It's really basic on that level. And someone asked me the other day, I think about a year ago, someone came up to me after a presentation pre-COVID, and they were just kind of like, hey, do you think cybersecurity is ever going to be eradicated? When is it going to go away? When are we going to stop worrying about it? And I thought about the question more and realized it never will, because at the underlying element, it's theft. So theft will always be here. It's been here since the dawn of time. It'll continue to be persistent in our society. It'll just take on different forms. So if you look at the thief angle, the issue there is do you address the threat? Now, most companies don't do this. Most companies just look from the victim perspective. But if you look from the thief perspective, it's working with law enforcement and then apprehending that individual, targeting and helping law enforcement escalate information, rising to their authority, or someone who's empowered to take the threat out. That is the focus. So if you're going to focus on cybersecurity, the root cause, it's the person who's stealing your data. So if you want to basically remedy it at that point, what you do is you share information, you share with one another, you develop a robust sharing platform to share with even competitors when it comes to cybersecurity, like indicators of compromise, data you're seeking. If you want to address it there, that's how you do it. You focus holistically on the threat actor and how you can help. And companies and organizations and individuals literally are quite empowered today to do this. If you're a large organization or work at an organization and you want to sort of help address the threat there, then it's something you have empowered to do by sharing information proactively with your government. And then again, you have to figure out who in your government is the one you want to share with. But indicators of compromise are things that can help identify the thief. So that's one angle. The other angle is the victim. Most companies and organizations are focused on a victim model, meaning they just try to secure their own internal network. If you focus on the victim model, that requires a lot more funding, actually, if you think about it, because now you got to secure your entire network. And you have to base depending on how large your organization is. And it's multifaceted. Just a little bit, I touched upon multiple things you have to do. Configuration. So you look at configurations or misconfigurations, that's paying cybersecurity experts or consultants to come in and help you. Hardware issues. If you're working like at IBM or Google, you have people across the globe to be able to now ensure that they're all working remote and paying for them to basically access something like a safe environment. And you're using my router suggestion, you're deploying thousands upon thousands of routers across your network. It costs a lot of money. And then you look at the biggest component most likely here is education. Educating your workforce to ensure that they're educated and make good decisions. When software fails or the hardware solution fails, you need the person to be able to make the right decision. Like, should I click on this link? I don't, maybe. You want them to make that right decision. They don't make the right decision on their own. You have to educate them. So that's the victim model. And in that victim model, most companies do this. It costs a lot of money, candidly. It's really a hybrid approach. You really want to attack on both fronts. The less expensive technique is actually focusing on the thief and helping eradicate the problem. Because if you think about this, in an ideal world, if you take away all cyber criminals, the threat drops to zero. In today's model, what typically is happening, the cyber criminals are operating with impunity because not a lot of people focus on the theft model. They're focused on the victim model. And there's a lot of money that's being thrown in here. Because if you think about it, you're just securing your network. The theft and the thief is still operating with impunity, just doing whatever they want to do.
It's very important.
Companies are just paying more and more money. And they're just throwing it. And you might make your network more secure, but that threat actor is still operating.
Correct. And that might be one of the motivations for threat actors to continue their operations.
It really is. But anyway, yeah, I can talk about that for hours, by the way. So I'll stop there.
All right. Okay. So I'll go to the next question, which Gautam has asked. What would be the general or first investigative approach you would use after a breach of an organization?
So that gets an incident response, which is a big practice. Depending on what the focus is, generally speaking, if a breach were to occur, one of the first things you want to identify is what was taken. So that's one element. The other one is the actor still in the network? These are really hard questions to answer, but those are the first two. And this is going to get kind of a long answer, just to forewarn you. I'll try to make it a little shorter because there's so many elements you have to factor in when it comes to incident response. So if you're just focused on what's happening, you definitely want to identify what was taken. If nothing was taken, if you can discern that, it's hard to do if you think about it, because most of the time these actors aren't going to remove something. They're going to copy something. So being able to have the optics on that and at all systems in your network and be able to snap your fingers and tell your network administrator, tell me what was copied. Think about it. If I were to ask you to tell me what was copied in your network last night, you'd be like, I don't know, we can track all of that down, right? But that's what you're going to have to do. So that's difficult, a daunting task. The other component that you're really concerned by is the person or individuals, are they still here? Once that's addressed, that's the first big one. Then you're then going to come back and you've identified, we'll say you can, it's hard to do, honestly, identify the threat actor is no longer in play or has the ability to come back. So if someone's coming into your network, they're not going to be persistent all the time on your network. They will enter and leave. So they'll create what is basically called a backdoor. And that backdoor allows them to come back and re-access. So you have to figure out what their access point is, the vector of compromise. You want to figure out what that is. Once you identify that, then it's securing it. So once that's done, we'll say you're able to get past that point. Then the next step of this is think about, well, what was taken? And if something was taken, let's assume it was. Now you got to focus on, response? Do you have to regulatory elements? Is there some sort of governing body that says because this occurred, you now have to report it? And that goes down a whole slew of questions that will then occur. But I'll stop there because I think the question was specifically, what do you do first? So those are the first two things I would do. That's what you want to focus on primarily initially.
Brilliant. Okay, and the next question from Paul is, should private companies be empowered to retaliate and or apply defense forward? It's a very important and interesting question.
It is. Thank you, Paul, for asking that question. I think the answer collectively, if you think about it, is no. I know it's not a satisfying answer. No, I want to press. I joked with people when I was in the FBI that I want to start my own company and I want to have like a red button in my office. And if someone attacks me, I deploy it and it just blocks it, blows up their network, right? And I was thinking about this for a while, how I would do this without being detected. Side note, if you want to know how to do it, we can talk offline, but not on a recorded line. No, but that's a bad idea. You should not do that. Because the reality is threat actors, especially when they're persistent, if they're criminal, if they're nation state, doesn't really matter, but they're not going to come from their originating IP. Like if I'm going to attack you, I'm not going to come from my home. So I'm going to go through an obfuscation practice of some sort, whether that's going for various VPNs I'm paying for, or most likely nodes that are controlled by another threat actor I'm paying to access. But basically there's where I'm coming from is not necessarily potentially a part of the scheme. It could be infrastructure. So when I was with the FBI, a lot of times what we would see companies, organizations have their network compromised, and threat actors were using open components on their network, like computer systems, as access points elsewhere. So if that were at play, which is quite possible because one of the key issues, and maybe we'll talk about it later, is asset inventory. Figuring out what assets are yours. A lot of companies don't do this well, and the bigger the company is, the worse they probably are about it. But if you have an open asset, we'll say you're Coke, and you have a bunch of assets across the globe, but some of these are open to compromise, and you're a threat actor, and you funnel through Coke's network, and now you're basically launching an attack. If you, as an end user, are like, you know what? I'm pressing my red button. You press your red button, you fire an attack, you hit Coke. And now Coke's like, what just happened? Why did our servers get dropped off? Now you got a bigger problem. Because now you got Coke and they're like scratching their head. They're going to figure out what happened and they're going to trace it back to you. And then if you're in another country, now you're dealing with international relationships. Because now you have the US saying, well, hold on, we had an attack from Australia for some random IP range here. We want to know who did it because it brought out one of our major companies. It gets really dicey. So because of that reason, you can't triangulate specifically where the threat came from. It's impossible to do on your own because of the various protocols and privacy measures that are being put in play now. I would advise people to not do that. However, the second part of the question was about defending your network. Definitely, going back to that victim model, you're definitely empowered to do that. I encourage you to build whatever protocols in play that defend and protect your users. So I think that's definitely where you want to spend your time. If you want to be more aggressive and you want to, you know what, I want to take more of a proactive approach. I don't want to just be a victim. Then what you do is you work in tandem with law enforcement. And that is something I encourage you to do. And that is just building that relationship with law enforcement. And we can talk about that a little more if someone's interested in learning a little bit more how to do it.
All right. Yeah, good. Thank you very much, Michael. One of the questions that I actually personally also had, and other people have asked similar questions, and this is how secure password saving products such as LastPass are, or should I save my password using a password manager or the browser? Similar question.
Yeah, no. So I use a password manager. If they are secure, there have been companies there have been companies who have been breached before. There will obviously be breaches. I think in any organization is something you have to contend with. So some people have concerns that, well, hold on, if I put all my passwords in one location and there's a breach, doesn't someone have access to all of it? In theory, they do, but depends on how that company is securing those passwords when it's data at rest. So if it's hashed, meaning you need to have another component held in a separate location to decrypt and understand what those passwords are when it's data at rest. If that's in play, most of the password managers are deploying it. it's very unlikely that someone's going to be able to compromise their network, then grab all the data needed in order to actually unlock all those passwords. I would imagine, I don't know this definitively, but if one of these companies were representatives were on this call, they'd probably say it's impossible. So very unlikely for them to do that. So that's one issue that's been presented to me in the past. So in other words, I think it's very safe to use, since I use it personally. If you're going to pick, if you're going to well, do you recommend using a password manager like LastPass, or can I just save everything in my Google browser? Like the Chrome browser will say, hey, you want to save this password? I would advise you to focus on the password manager. It's tempting to use the Google browser. I've used it in the past. It's so easy, because right when you go, like, you log into your bank account, Google's like, boom, here's your credential information. And you're like, oh, that's so nice. You just click enter and now you're in. So it's easy use, is really convenient. However, they tend to be less secure. They also tend to be targeted more, because if you think about it, if I'm a threat actor and I want to spend time writing code to try to compromise something, does it make sense to go after LastPass, which is one of 100 companies out there facilitating that they're built for security? You have to really infiltrate that network to acquire that. Or does it make more sense going after a browser? Everyone probably has Chrome now installed on their computers. Right now, you're probably watching this through Chrome. It makes more sense there because the attack surface is so much larger. So I'm a threat actor. I want to focus on that. I want to create vulnerabilities for browsers. Well, what's valuable in browsers? Well, credential information. So that's one of their targets. So because of that, I would advise people to not save their password in a browser, just because there's a higher probability the theft is going to occur at that point, and not the password manager.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. That was a good response. Very educational as well.
All my responses. How dare you?
Yes. Yeah. All right. And we got another question. Next question from Bhavik. And Bhavik is asking, what, in your view, should include for end user cybersecurity awareness for an organization?
All right. Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes. What, in your view, should be included for end users cybersecurity awareness by an
okay.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at creating an awareness campaign, there's a lot of things to consider. So if you're basically saying, well, hey, I want to help educate my company or organization, huge. I think that's something every organization should do. If you do not have your own educational protocol or thought process, and it's not ongoing and persistent, there's companies out there that I could recommend that you can pay money to, so that they'll do it for you at your behest. But if you're going to do it yourself, you're going to think about it. There's a few things I would look at. One, I'd look at creativity. I think we've all been privy to any type of IT or workplace violence, or any type of training that we're like, oh God, this is boring. Cybersecurity is not sexy, right? It sounds kind of cool, but generally speaking, when you're looking at it from an end user perspective, it's just one more thing you have to do. So because it's so important, and because it's inherently not as interesting as other topics, you definitely want to make sure it's creative, meaning whatever awareness campaign you're going to launch, there's a creativity element that people want to watch, that they're interested in doing that. So creativity is one element. Another one is simplicity is key. You don't want it too complex. I hope I was able to distill some complex information to you in a way that you can understand. But if I were to basically not do that well, then you're just lost. And if you're an end user in a network that's working in marketing or working in sales, you're not technical. You're like, I don't know what this person's saying. They lost me. So sometimes some of these training awareness campaigns are just too complex. So simplicity is key. Cost obviously is a component. You want to basically determine what the cost is. Now, I would encourage organizations to think about this. There's a cost associated with paying for the solution, but the cost, I would argue, is much lower by being proactive than it is reactive. Now, what I mean by that is reactive is one of your end users clicks on something, right? Or sends money to an account they're not supposed to, and now you're out $150,000. When I was with the FBI, there were cases that were brought to my attention with business email compromise, like I talked about earlier. Companies would lost millions of dollars, literally. It was crazy the company would lose this much money, but because there's such a high volume of transactions, and if someone compromised it because they weren't educated, they didn't know the signs to look for, and now all of a sudden all this money is being siphoned off, that's a lot more than paying for an awareness campaign. The other thing too, like one of the big pain points, I chatted with two CISOs recently, by the way, and asked them what the big pain points were. And both of them basically said the same thing. It's end users, whether it's a customer or whether it's an employee, but it's their action and trying to help them make good decisions. So that's, again, back to my point about being proactive, and proactive is training. So I definitely think when you're looking at a cost, if you're trying to articulate, well, how do I justify the cost of this training? You're going to basically save money in the long run. And then I mentioned a little bit before, one of the key components is ongoing. You don't want to do a one-time thing. You don't want to be like, hey, I got this one guy to talk to us. We're good forever. In the FBI, this is me high-fiving, by the way, because you know what this was. In the FBI, there was a large international company, and they had a data breach, and we went there. We were chatting with their in-house attorney. They remain nameless. I try to always keep all this nameless, but you've likely stayed at their hotel, put it that way. So when we're there, we're chatting with their in-house attorney. He basically shared something with us. He's like, hey, so this last data breach, that's it. We're never gonna get breached again, because we're doing all these steps and we're doing all these things that prevent us from ever being breached again. And it's just funny. I'm just like, no, we're gonna get breached again. It's inevitable, because you're so large, and you're not. By you telling me that tells me that you don't realize the threats are constantly advancing and persistent. If the answer were different, if the answer were like, hey, we're good now, however, we're going to stay ahead of the threat, and we're going to constantly innovate. That's not what he was saying. He was saying we're good, we're not spending more money. Which is back to my point. Your training has to be ongoing. It can never just stop. So if you're just going to bring in someone one time to talk to your company organization, it's not enough. You need to have ongoing cadence. Monthly, you don't want to be too frequent. Monthly is probably pretty good. Have some sort of cybersecurity awareness training. Anyway, I was a long answer. I was able to cover some points there.
All right. Thanks. Another good question that I got from someone from LinkedIn, and it was, what's your take on viral apps such as TikTok? Do they represent a real threat to our privacy and data? Indian government just banned a bunch of social apps, including TikTok, from their network stores. So what's your take on that?
Yes, and so this goes back to our conversation a little bit earlier. TikTok is a big concern. There's multiple concerns. Any company, so TikTok is basically a technology or an organization that's operating in China. And one of the things that I think it's important to realize, when you're operating in a country like China, think about it. Think about if we owned a business in China. Let's freeze and let's assume we're all operating in China. We all work for the same company. Here's what's going to happen. They're going to basically, the Chinese government's going to say, hey, welcome to China. Now that you're all operating here, you have to follow some of the rules. One of the rules is we could care less about privacy. You need to build technology so that we as a government can then operate and monitor what's happening. So the civil liberties that many times are afforded to us in Australia or India or the United States, that's not in play there. That, if remember, if we're building tech in that company or any sort of software solution, privacy is not a concern. They could care less about it. The opposite. They want to be able to monitor. So that underlying technology is going to be built with that backdoor, built with that mindset. That's a huge issue, because a lot of times in the other countries, that's not at play. Privacy is important. It's a huge issue right now across the globe, is we want to have increased privacy. That's not the case in China. So we're developing technology or software. Privacy is something that's not an issue. So then we export that technology to the world where they do care about privacy. It's just not built into it. It's the opposite. The other complication is then, so not only is culture an issue, the other complication is when the Chinese government taps on our shoulder and they're like, hey, we want to basically utilize this because remember, we gave you a lot of funding and we own you. So we want you to do this for us. We can't say no in those situations.
Right.
So even if we're trying to just make money and do something that the vast majority of us are going to do, make a living, we're beholden to the government. At that stage, then we have to basically hang reins over to the government. So any type of technology or hardware or anything out of China, it's all susceptible to what I just described. And a lot of people in the US at least don't think about this because that's not in play here. That's the exact opposite. I mean, look how publicized, like, and some of you are probably aware of this, some of you might not be, But a few years ago, when the FBI was trying to unlock an iPhone, Tim Cook took a stand publicly. And I think globally it was something that people recognized against the FBI/US government, said, no, we're not doing it. That can't happen in China. It would never happen in China. So these are things I think we need to be thinking about as consumers when we're downloading applications. The Chinese will continue to create more, and they'll start innovating on their own technology. I encourage end users like ourselves, before we download something, to think, well, where is the country of origin? And what's the mindset of this company operating in that country? Sometimes we forget that. So TikTok is an example of one where they were taking a lot of data. I would not personally trust anything that comes from a country that doesn't value privacy.
That says a lot. Yes, yeah, and that's an important point as well. Correct. Right. It's an interesting question, the next one, which is, what are the newest phishing scams and what are telltale signs that a link or an email is fake?
So I actually had something about this recently. I put out a one. So if you're, by the way, a plug for me on LinkedIn. If you're not connecting on LinkedIn, please send me a connection request. And then if you do that, I have a lot of free information that you can download. One of them is a one-page phishing doc. And this one-page phishing doc, I kind of talk about specifically what you're asking. The key, there's a few things I hone in on. One, there's 5 things. So one is questionable domains. If you receive an email and the domain itself is questionable, that's one of the things. For example, if the email, you think it's from Netflix, one of the things you want to look at is the sender, and you want to see the domain linked to this. Now, there were spoofing techniques in the past that a lot of email providers have sort of eradicated. So sometimes if it's in play, you'll see the email address that the person spoofs, and then behind it, you'll see an email address that's actually linked to, or it can be networked. That's something that a lot of email providers have provided just for safety purposes. So you want to look at that second one, and the second one will then tell you, that's probably not from Netflix. So that's a questionable domain. Another sign of a phishing attempt is it's poorly written. They're missing the vernacular is odd. They're missing spaces. The syntax is off. When you think about it, it doesn't really make sense. If you're getting an email from Netflix, there's a high probability it's going to be heavily scrutinized by people who have a command of the English language. And so they're going to be able to actually write it well. So that's not at play, then that's a suspicious activity. Another one is suspicious links in the email. This is harder to do on a mobile device, but if you're on a desktop, you can hover over a link and do not click it. But you hover over, if you look in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, it'll then disclose the actual routable domain address that is going to go to. Meaning when you click on it, that's where it's going to take you. If that is a questionable site, you don't click on it. Generally speaking, if you have an email from Netflix and you're not certain by it, just stop, log into Netflix independently, open up a browser, go into Netflix independently, enter your own credential information. You don't have to click through the email. And then generic greeting. If it's something that's just kind of like hi or greetings, something where they're not basically formalizing your name, that's an indication that it's also a phishing email. And then the final one is a sense of urgency. Sense of urgency where you feel like I need to do something right away. If you're feeling that way, that's not sent by Netflix. So again, those are the 5 things. So questionable domains, poorly written, suspicious links, generic greeting, and sense of urgency. Those are things to look for. In terms of like latest and greatest, it's really whatever the topic du jour is. So like example, right now you're looking at anything with COVID. Right now there's a big movement in the US for Black Lives Matter and funding. So you have a lot of people who are masking themselves as representatives from that movement to encourage them to donate. And again, these are fraudsters. They'll go for anything that's in the news because it's easy for them to do it. And and there's no rules that they're engaged with, right? They're not basically like, hey, Black Lives Matter, you cool with us basically taking your logos and stuff and trying to scam people? They're not going to do that. They'll care less. They're going to look for anything that's relevant. So honestly, when it comes to phishing campaigns, whatever's happening in the global news cycle, that's something you have to be cognizant of.
Right. So I recently read somewhere, and it was an interesting thing, that some people paste spy pixels in the emails. And if you have those spy pixels, the moment you open that email, those spy pixels download on your system and um, execute themselves there. And this is how you install something. But what are those spy pixels?
Well, when you say like what they are, like you're talking about like specifically like what's happening, or
Yeah, well, what recently I read somewhere that there's something called spy pixels, or images which are not visible in an email, but once you open an email, then these images which are not really visible, and if I remember it correctly, they were called spy pixels. And those spy pixels, they get downloaded and get executed.
that's
Once
interesting.
that,
I've heard techniques like this. I've never heard that term. Typically, in the terminology I'm familiar with, it's a tracking pixel.
right,
So a tracking pixel, I'll answer that question. What a tracking pixel is the way to basically track you. There was also something that my old company I used to work with. It's kind of a combination of what we're talking about. There was something that is termed a polyglot. A polyglot, if you look at the meaning, it's basically like something that can basically be done like twice, so or like it's multifaceted. So, but in the implement or in the way it's being used, and what I'm describing as a polyglot is like an ad you would see, and there's an underlining code behind it. So the machine thinks it's an image, but in reality, there's underlining code that's being executed without your awareness. So what you're describing is something similar in the sense that the image is invisible, but the machine is interpreting it to be something else. So that's essentially, again, generally termed polyglot. And if that's what you're describing, then that is something that is common-ish. It's harder to do. And what that basically is where it tricks you as an end user, like, oh, I think this is fine, and you pursue it, but there's something that's going to be triggered. No matter what happens, generally speaking, there's a lot of protocols and safety elements in play to protect you if you have antivirus, if you have a firewall, software firewall, so, or you have good controls on your example. Let's look at you have a polyglot and what you're describing a pixel situation. If you haven't something's executed, the way to protect yourself from that is when you're creating privileges on your computer, you don't want to basically operate as admin. You want to operate as just a normal user. You want that operating system to prompt you, like, hey, did you want to do this? And if you're like, yes, then you have to basically enter a password or biometric, like a fingerprint scan or something. So then you make a concerted decision you're going to pursue something and not automatically. You don't want it to happen automatically. Especially if you think about a family situation, you have kids, you have other people who are less sophisticated users in your home downloading things. You want to have control over that. But in other words, so in that situation, if you were to be hit with something like this and you thought it was fine, if you had that final protocol in play where the operating system's like, hey, before you download this, you have to give me a permission, that awakens you to something that happened. So you click on it, you're like, wait, what? That will tell you, like, you opened something you shouldn't have opened. The operating system telling you, are you sure you want to install this? And that's where you can back out safely. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And one of the other elements to think about this, like Chrome is actually pretty good about this, but they encapsulate data within your instance in Chrome. They try to sandbox it to some extent. If you really are concerned about downloading or opening up emails, you want to take it to another level, you want to basically use something called a virtual machine, where you can operate in a virtual environment where everything's self-contained. That's taking it to a level that probably most people aren't interested in doing because it's not as convenient. But in other words, so you would basically do create a virtual environment so you can operate with impunity, basically. You can click on things, you can download whatever you want to download. And then when you're done with it, because it's self-contained, it just blows up. You just basically eradicate it when you basically end your session. A lot of companies use this technique. in order to help sandbox emails. They want to open up in a pristine environment. If you're doing cybersecurity forensics, you're operating in a sandbox environment like that. But anyways, that's something to think about if you're really concerned. You want to open up something. You want to basically download a virtual environment and operate in that virtual environment to see it. And this way you can basically ensure that it's contained in that environment. And when you're done with it, you can end it and it's not going to affect your current operating system.
Right. Quite interesting, and thank you for that. Are there any other questions from our audience here? Because my list of questions is complete. It's a lot of questions and a lot of answers, and I really appreciate all those responses. Very educational, very interesting. Any other questions? I know that Michael has been speaking for 1 hour now, but I also know that you have good habit of that. Because if we don't have any more questions, then so let's wait for another minute and see if there are any other questions.
I just have one. It's repeating one I've actually written down. You mentioned earlier about the distrust of the Chinese companies. And there's a lot of organizations, US-based, Australia-based, UK-based, which have development done in China. Do we trust them more?
Yes, but a little more. So everything I described to you, and some of you might be aware of this, some of you might not be aware of this. If you operate in China as a major organization, and you were basically approached the Chinese and say, we want to build something in your country, what the Chinese would do is say, sure, but you have to help build our critical infrastructure. There's one company I was privy to in Los Angeles, California, in the US. They shared this with me. They basically shared with me that when they operate in China, they're operating under a few terms and conditions. One of them is that for them to open a manufacturing facility, they have to build Chinese infrastructure. They were building a water treatment facility for the Chinese government. So I'm like, that's interesting. And then the second thing she shared with me is they don't own any of the land. Because of those issues, this particular company would only manufacture goods to be sold in China, and everything they made in the U.S. was manufactured in the U.S. because they recognize that threatened the supply chain, because the Chinese government has that dominion over them, and they knew it, and they made a concerted decision that they didn't think it was fiscally responsible for them to manufacture in China and export. I say that because it kind of goes back to answer your question: is should you trust those companies? If you're operating in China and using technology, no, because the Chinese government, like Google and others who right now in the US are standing up and saying, we want to stand behind encryption. We want to make sure there's no backdoor. It's a big debate right now happening in the US. That debate's not happening in China. Those companies, if they want to operate in China, have to comply with the Chinese government. What the Chinese government says is, no, there's a way for us to monitor everything that happens in our country. VPNs are outlawed. That's another example. So those are different things to be cognizant of. So if you're using that technology and it's in China, I wouldn't trust them. If you're using technology and the origin is different, if you're downloading it from like Google Play Store in Australia or in India or another country, that's different. Now, I think you hit on another interesting point, which is, can we trust companies? That's another question. Companies are just people. They're just like us. So we can trust them to some degree. But like example, in the US, if a company were to basically do something that is against the law, and like example, like one of the laws that protect people in the US is privacy. So there is certain privacy afforded to people. If they were to violate that law, they themselves are going to be held accountable. That's nice in the sense that it helps give you some confidence that, okay, this technology, the software I'm using, is governed to some degree. However, at the end of the day, these are just people making decisions. So they're going to be aggressive. They're going to have, they're results driven. They're going to want to get as much data as possible. So sometimes they're going to be aggressive. Like recently, there was another article that was highlighting LinkedIn. So like TikTok, one of the concerns with TikTok was they were, like for Apple, if you're using an iPhone and it wasn't patched with the latest software, TikTok could grab everything in your clipboard. So whenever you copy paste, it's something that's saved in clipboard. Well, TikTok was grabbing all that. LinkedIn was doing the same thing. So LinkedIn was grabbing all that. And so people are like, well, if TikTok's doing it and LinkedIn's doing it, well, what the heck? One's US, one's Chinese. The difference is, though, that LinkedIn isn't sharing that with the US government. LinkedIn is just internally using it. So the question is, well, should you trust LinkedIn? Like, they since said they're not going to do that anymore. But they're, at the end of the day, these are just people. Right? These are just people behind the organizations making decisions. Their motivation is really what you can kind of question. Is it profit-driven, or is it something that is more aligned with privacy issues or lack thereof?
Right. So, Michael, what about the permissions in apps? There are some apps which ask for a lot of permissions, some don't. Should we trust those permissions as well?
It's unfortunate, no. It's so tough, right? Because these companies, it's a balancing act. And a lot of operating systems, so like Android is getting a lot better about it, allowing you to sort of govern specific permissions. So if you're running the latest version of Android, you can go in specific to the application and say, I want to deny this application access to my camera, to my microphone, to whatever. They give you that granular level of detail, but you have to be operating the latest version of Android for that. So the operating systems, these companies are getting better at ensuring people have greater levels of privacy and control. But generally speaking, from an application developer perspective, it's not necessarily nefarious. They're doing this because of legality issues. They want to make sure that, well, we might use this information in the future, so we'll just grab everything. And it kind of makes sense if you're working in a development environment. I used to be a developer. You're not thinking nefarious things. You're not just thinking, well, I just need to use this to make sure the user experience is good. So anyway, it's this balancing act. I think the vast majority of U.S., Australian, Indian-based companies are really just operating at the behest of their shareholders. They're not incentivized to sort of go into our private logs or private communications and mine it. They're not really trying to do that. Most likely, they're really more focused on trying to create a better user experience. Others in other countries that they don't value privacy, the focus is very different. But it's a balancing act. So it's tough to answer, because I do think that the wave is changing, though. So I think in the future, you're going to see more and more greater levels of control afforded to you and us as end users to be able to decide whether or not we want to give an app permission or not permission to do something.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. And what about multi-factor authentication? How effective it is?
So it's I use it for every time a bank, a financial institution, an organization affords it to me. Facebook, LinkedIn, anything. I encourage you to use it. So multi-factor authentication essentially means there's multiple ways you're going to authenticate when you use something for the first time. So, like example, I used Google Authenticator. That's what they call it. So if I were to give you, Rajesh, my phone, I'm like, hey, here's my phone. Now you have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. But if I were to, because that's where I'm getting my multi-factor authentication sent to. But if I were to just give you my username and password right now for my email account, you could be like, oh, this is awesome. So when you log into or you try to log into my email account, Google's gonna be like, hey, cool, we see you're coming from a machine that we've never seen before and a country you've never logged in from before. So we're gonna need you to give us a different level of authentication, and there's a code that's been sent to your phone. And for my case, I have to open up an application and this code is sent to me. You would then be like, well, Michael, send me your code you just got on your cell phone, because I can't log in without your code. That's multi-factor authentication. So Google allows for this. Any financial institutions that are moving towards this, they should all be doing this. It's not always turned on. Sometimes it's turned off because it does create if you think about it, if you're not a sophisticated user, it's more cumbersome. So it's one of the things that either A, they'll prompt you, hey, you should use this. Do you want to use this? Or they'll have it available, but you have to go into settings and find it. But I would encourage people to use multi-factor authentication. It's definitely a layer of protection that's not foolproof, but it gives you more protection than not having it.
True. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Looks like we don't have any other questions, or if we do, please let me know, or you can speak up.
Hey, Michael, thank you for your time. I think it has been a very interesting session, especially listening to cybersecurity from a cybersecurity expert is one. I think, with your background and the FBI, it's been another dimension being added to the entire conversation. Um, the question that I had was regarding the theft model that you suggested, right? Rather than focusing on the victim and focusing on the actual actor. Particularly after the state-based actors and the kind of repercussions that they get to face whenever they steal something. Like, if a state actor infiltrates a sovereignty of another country and steals something in a physical world, the repercussion would be much, much serious, right? The UN might get involved. A lot of global organizations, there'll be a lot of chatter, and there'll be a lot of reactions. But when it comes to cybersecurity and the theft that happens in the digital world, seems to be a bit more, even the governments who get attacked. The other day, I think a couple of weeks ago, Australian Prime Minister made it aware that there has been certain attacks made by some state actor. But the problem is that it was not forthcoming. He was not forthcoming to say that, okay, it was China or whatever the country, right? The media or the private media had to speculate and kind of put the finger on, okay, this is China or maybe China. There's a high chance that it's China and all that, right? Why do you think is the reluctance from this government to go after whoever is the state actor and hold them to account, or to kind of react on this?
So I think there's multiple factors to consider. One of them is something you guys probably aren't privy to that I'll kind of enlighten you on. One of the complications with governments is what we do in the government. I suck like I still work there. What the government tends to do is they classify data. So basically what that means is there's a classification protocol put in play. Like in the US government, there's something like, it's secret, top secret, no foreign. So basically what that means, it's top secret and no individuals of foreign nationalization can actually access it. Here's the problem. You do this because you're trying to compartmentalize who has access to this sensitive information. So when US government does this, that prevents many times, individuals like myself when I was in the FBI to talk about it. I can't, because if I were to do that, then I'd be in violation of the standard operating procedures, but more importantly, the law that's governed me as an agent, that I could be prosecuted. I could be thrown in jail for disclosing something that's secret. Like right now, when I left the FBI, I signed a waiver that said I cannot disseminate anything I thought I saw within the government that was classified. If I were to do that, then I could be prosecuted. Again, these are all measures to protect the data, the techniques, and the methods. The downside of that is it's hard for even presidents or prime ministers to then disseminate that information to the wider population. The way you can kind of do that is there's something called tear lines, where information that's highly sensitive can be sort of watered down to some degree. And they're given a tear line. Like if you think of a sheet of paper, they tear it and they say, okay, here's what you can say. So many times in the situation you're describing, I don't know, I'm speculating, the prime minister might have been realizing this information is sensitive, that if he were to disclose it, the actors themselves were to then maybe change their modus operandi or change the techniques or whatever that the Australian government, or a lot of these governments are working in tandem with one another globally. So it might affect the investigation of this threat actor. So he can't disclose it entirely, but he felt pressured because he's like, well, I need to share this to some degree. So he gets his tear line and he shares something that's kind of watered down that still allows you to create awareness, but at the same time isn't really highlighting the specific country, which wouldn't necessarily affect the underlying investigation. It's a real balancing act that most people aren't privy to. But that's probably what was in play. And partly due to this classification issue I described. Sometimes the classification issue is paramount. Like an example, I was privy to situations when I was with the FBI that the CIA, what they would do is they would purposely not disclose information about their source to other government agencies in the US. And there was a meeting I was a part of, and this came out, and other government agencies were like, well, why aren't you sharing it? And the CIA basically said, well, because if there's only two people in the world who know this, the president of that country and this person. So if we were to disclose this and somehow this is leaked, then our source essentially is killed. So we can't disclose it. Again, another complication. So if the prime minister were operating with information that sensitive, then he disclosing this, then that causes these governments to be like, well, hold on, only two people know this. And the president's like, it's not me. And then, he just looks at the person who actually knows it, and now he knows where the leak's coming from. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. Okay. Thanks, Michael.
No problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate your time and a lot of good information that you gave us. I think it's you have already been speaking for more than 1 hour, so I think we should wrap it up now. And once again, thank you so much for joining, and thank you everyone else as well.
Of course, and I appreciate you guys staying up late for the chat with me. But again, connect me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to chat with you guys if you have any other questions. And thank you, Rajesh, for hosting all this. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. Right. Thanks, Rajesh, for hosting.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Take care.